mark, and we'll only have time for just a few questions afterwards, after each. So there's going to be questions. You'll hang out after you're done presenting, Siena, and answer a few questions from me for sure.
Okay.
But that's kind of how we're going to go, and I'll look back to the crowd. If anybody wants to ask any questions, feel free to do so. Okay? So look for me in the front. I'll be 5, 3, 1 minute left.
It's not like an eject button, right?
Maybe. Whenever you're ready, go for it.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the Spokane Intercollegiate Research Conference for accepting the research. I'm really excited to share this with you guys. So perceptions of anti-doping policy among collegiate coaches. What is doping? Well, simply, doping is the consumption of drugs or supplements that change the body's natural chemistry for the purposes of performance enhancement. Doping in Olympic sport has been defined by these cases over the last 12 years. Lance Armstrong, arguably the most high-profile doping case. Marion Jones, the track and field runner who ended up having to give back her medals after she was found to have tested positive. And then, of course, the recent events surrounding Maria Sharapova and the ongoing investigation of Russian statewide doping. So where does college come into this? You're talking about Olympic sport, anti-doping. How does college fit into this? Well, for many NCAA governed sports, Olympic or international level competition is the highest level competition and the next step of progression for some of these sports and for some of these athletes, going past their collegiate careers. This is compared to other sports such as the NHL in hockey, MLB in baseball, MLS in soccer, NBA in basketball. So college, 168 collegiate student athletes competed for Team USA at the Rio Games this past summer. And as part of transitioning to this elite level, they have to be aware of anti-doping policy, not just NCAA anti-doping policy, but world anti-doping policy as well. Past literature focuses only on either collegiate athletes or Olympic athletes exclusively and in very black and white terms. But for a lot of these athletes, they either fall into both of these categories or will fall into both of these categories. And for these athletes as well, their coaches are their biggest influencers and teachers. So for current student athletes, like the 168 I just mentioned, they actually fall into both categories at one point. And because coaches are the vehicle for information and for influence, how do collegiate coaches feel about anti-doping policy? So the core of the study is twofold. The first part is the World Anti-Doping Code. The World Anti-Doping Agency was founded in 2003, and the first code was published in 2004. This code maintains a policy of strict liability, so if you violate the rules in any way, you get penalized or sanctioned. There's been heavy criticism of this policy, noting outdated testing methods, sanctions against the innocent, percentage tested versus percentage caught, things of that nature. The other part of this study was actually some research done by Patterson, Backhouse, and Duffy in 2016, and they surmised that education at the elite level suffered from major gaps between governing bodies. They also noted that coaches are both the influencers and the influenced at the same time. They also concluded that communication and cooperation between international federations and coaches was key to evolution in anti-doping policy. However, this research, like others, focused exclusively on elite athletes, those solely competing at the international level. The gap therefore becomes there's no literature on collegiate athletes that are competing, that are either going on to compete at the Olympics or are competing in the Olympics at the same time. So because of the subjective nature of perceptions, as well as the very sensitive topic of doping, grounded theory was both the best theory and the best methodology that we used for this study. Grounded theory is founded on two core principles: constant comparison and theoretical sampling. So essentially that your questions have to evolve as your data evolves, and your sample pool also has to evolve as in the same way, much in the same way. Grounded theory was coupled with a semi-structured interview process for this study, and it allowed for exchange and evolution of discussion. The data was then analyzed by a frequency-based coding process. Our participant pool for this study consisted of head and assistant coaches at the NCAA Division I level. As you can see here, these 6 coaches that we interviewed out of the 49 that we contacted represented 1 major and 2 non-major conferences. We've narrowed down Olympics collegiate sport into summer versus winter and chose summer based on the frequency and availability. Did a random sample to get our regions, and then from there we selected our schools. So using the aforementioned coding system that I just talked about, 3 primary themes emerged. We have the role of athletic trainers, the levels of education, and challenges of technology. And as you can see, another theme also emerged, but it ultimately fell under education, and that was a heavy emphasis on street drug and alcohol education. So here we have highlights of what coaches said. As far as the role of athletic trainers, one coach said, "It really falls on our athletic trainer's shoulders because she is the most educated and on top of that information." For levels of education, one coach said, "Our sport, I think, has a not in our sport mentality because there's so little incentive to win as a sport that doesn't have a professional level after college." For street drug and alcohol education, which was a sub-theme of levels of education, if they're of age, educating them on the effects of alcohol, marijuana, designer drugs, and not only how that can affect your performance, but your eligibility as well. And lastly, with challenges of technology, for as many ways as they can detect substance abuse and doping, the people who are out there trying to get it done are always going to be 1 step ahead of that. So what does this all mean? Well, essentially, the street drug and alcohol education reinforced NCAA literature, which just basically highlights the prevalence of the issue in collegiate athletics. Coaches' criticism of challenges of technology actually also highlights the criticisms of the current world anti-doping policy and their current testing methods. However, the findings regarding lower than expected levels of education and the role of athletic trainers is new to the current literature landscape. Coaches' repeated emphasis on the important role of athletic trainers suggests that while coaches are one of the biggest influencers, they're certainly not the only influencers, as noted in previous literature. The lower than expected levels of education, especially their correlations to the prevalence of doping within their sport, is completely new and may be attributed to several different factors, such as the media, some lack of high-profile cases per sport, some sports are more associated with doping than others, and it also highlights how convoluted the lines of jurisdiction are within amateur sport as a whole in the United States. Who becomes in charge of this education? Who's responsible for that? So some implications for sport professionals for the future. For coaches, just because it hasn't happened in the sport doesn't mean it can't happen in the sport. And education must be emphasized, much in the same way that a coach is educated on issues such as negligence, NCAA bylaws, or other legislative procedures. The finding also leads to a need for increased communication between collegiate coaches and their related and associated national governing bodies. That'll ensure a seamless transition for those athletes either seeking to advance to a higher level of competition or who are going to engage in that higher level of competition at some point during their careers. For governance officials, the landscape of governance and autonomy within doping policy is currently changing. Sport governance officials could really benefit from the opinions of all the parties involved. Coaches are in the thick of it. They're there in those decisions when athletes choose or choose not to use performance-enhancing substances. Therefore, their opinions are critical. You have to know what they think because they're in the middle of that. Inclusion of coaches would also ensure a comprehensive policy progress. Some limitations of the current study, the exclusion of winter sports, which wasn't a huge limitation at first, and then within the last week or so became a huge limitation because the NHL recently decided not to include an Olympic break in their upcoming hockey season and threatened that some players might be in breach of their contract and threatened to fine them if they decided to play. So that's a whole other area of study that really could be studied and probably should be studied depending on how things go this coming winter. Our small sample size, we kind of expected it. We only had 6 responses out of 49 total coaches that were contacted. It's somewhat expected due to the subject matter. It's not something that everyone wants to talk about. In addition, some of the coaches we reached out to were in season and it was really difficult for them to find time in their schedules. The lack of input from athletic trainers due to time constraints, this goes back to theoretical sampling. If time had allowed, the responses of trainers to coaches' comments and then coaches' responses in return would have created a more generalizable perception of all of the influencers involved. And lastly, despite all these limitations or findings and things like that, my personal reasoning for conducting this study and my passion for the subject matter comes from one of the philosophical pillars of the modern Olympics: all sports for all people. That means that everyone deserves a chance to play. Everyone deserves a chance to excel. And for that to truly exist, sport must be clean.